If you're a fan of classic Hollywood cinema, there are certain things you've noticed over the years. There's a different cadence to the way the actors speak. There's a different style in the way the dialogue is written. There's a different pacing with the editing. And there's probably something else you have unfortunately noticed as well. They can be very racist. But why is that? Why were the movies of classic Hollywood so racist? How did we get there? And why is it so important to preserve them exactly as they are? I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about what I believe to be the most important decade in Hollywood history for truly exposing the truth of who we were as a people. Shouldn't the most racist era of filmmaking in American history be the earliest era of filmmaking? I mean, we started making movies in the late 1800s, for Christ's sakes, just a handful of decades after the country made chattel slavery illegal. Surely that period, late 1800s, early 1900s, that would be the most racist. And yes, it would be, to a degree, but not in the way you'd think. You see, here's the difference. In the earliest days of American filmmaking, yes, it was incredibly racist. If you go to the Internet Movie Database, IMDb, and you do a search on a certain slur, a big one, you know the one, it starts with an N, you're going to find it in the titles of several short films from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. And it's there not ironically or in a sense of empowerment, like it would be, say, in the 1970s. No, it's there just because nobody had a problem using it in the title of a movie. But while that was brazen and unforgivable and repulsive in almost every way imaginable, most of the movies being made in that era were too focused on fantastical trips to the moon, the lives of the American fireman, and great train robberies to really be concerned with objectifying, denigrating, mocking, and insulting non-white people. But that was about to change. In 1915, D.W. Griffith released his epic Civil War film, Birth of a Nation. It's been called the most reprehensibly racist movie ever made. And when you watch it, it's kind of hard to argue that point. It basically takes the story of the Civil War and the Reconstruction period and retells it in a way in which, well, essentially black people are the problem all around. Black men seek only to get white women. Mulattoes take control of the freed black people to revolt against the white people, and those infamous guys in the pointy white hoods, they're the heroes of the movie. Not ironically, they're the actual heroes of the movie. The movie itself caused such a backlash, despite its glowing box office success, that Hollywood wouldn't really attempt another massive epic Civil War tale until, well, more than a couple of decades later, and making sure they cleaned it all up quite a bit. But we're going to get to that in a minute. First, let's get back to why Birth of a Nation was such a big problem in the first place. And yes, the movie itself is obviously a big part of the problem. But the real problem was something else. Something far more insidious. And this is it. This is the problem. And what is this? It's a history of the movies book called Silence to Sound by Juliette P. Schoen. It was finished in 1974 and published in 1976, over 60 years after the release of Birth of a Nation, a movie that had undergone backlash and protest in 1915 for its racist comment, and yet 60 years later was still being praised as though nothing had ever happened. And that's the problem. Film history and film criticism treated racism in the movies as if it was just a kind of an annoyance to be swept under the rug or waved away so we could get back to talking about the technical qualities and technical aspects of a movie, as if that's all that mattered. In fact, in this very book, Juliet Schoen devotes an entire chapter to the birth of a nation. Chapter 4, entitled The Birth of an Art. Throughout the piece, she talks about Birth of a Nation almost rapturously, saying things like, it was the first modern motion picture, structured much like the narrative features of today and incorporating most of the techniques and practices commonly associated with the medium. In this chapter, she devotes 14 pages to singing the praises of Birth of a Nation. And in those 14 pages, she also devotes... Hold on. One paragraph to the racism. She admits that it seriously detracts from Griffith's accomplishment and talks about how people, both black and white, protested it at the time, but finishes that little paragraph by saying that most people were so overwhelmed by the monumental presentation that they were quite willing to overlook the harmful implications. You see, that's the issue. The racism was always treated like it was just a minor factor and nothing more than that. And it wasn't just Juliet P. Schoen. It had been treated that way from the very beginning, and really until the 21st century, most film critics continued to treat it that very same way. Not just Birth of a Nation, but all movies containing racist elements were looked upon as if to say, well, sure, they've got that against them, but look what they achieved technically. And indeed, the cinema of the silent period would go on to great technological innovations and incredible technical accomplishments, while also being very racist, mainly in portrayal. What do I mean mainly by portrayal? Well, the silent period reached its peak during the 1920s, and it was concerned in many of its biggest movies with the exotic. Think The Orient, Sailing the Seven Seas, Arabia. And most of those characters, if not all of them exclusively, were played by white people. White actors playing non-white roles. It didn't matter if the character was Chinese. It didn't matter if the character was from the lands of Arabia. They were played by a white actor. And that's what I mean mainly by portrayal. Now, the practice didn't end there. I don't think anyone's going to soon forget Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, and that was all the way up in 1961. But the practice of white actors playing non-white roles probably hit its peak in the 1920s. After that, when sound came in, we reached the greatest decade for Hollywood and America, really showing the world who they were. So we come to the 1930s. This is, for my money, the most important decade in the history of film. This was the decade in which American film fully embraced sound technology. It was the first full decade of sound. Even the silent films of Chaplin made in the 30s had synchronized sound to them and some dialogue to a small degree. This was the first decade where they had this new technology that they were working with. At the start of the decade, you had films that were, well, they seemed a little creaky because they were trying to figure out how to make silent films, but with sound. Should they still make them the way they made them in the silence? Or should they make them like a stage play? Nobody was really sure. And you also had other things like 3-strip Technicolor. Now, Technicolor had been around and color films had been around before the 1930s. But it was the 1930s where they were fully embraced and seen as a viable option along with black and white instead of just something rare and expensive and unusable most of the time. And you saw the first full enforcement of the production code, also known as the Hays Code after Will Hays, but it was fully enforced by Joseph Breen. Now, when it was fully enforced, it changed the way they made movies. And all of this was happening in this extraordinary decade that started out with films kind of confused as to what they should be and how they should make them, and ending with aesthetic and artistic leaps from where the decade started. And through it all, it also brought along with it the worst and most vile racial tendencies American filmmaking had to offer. Now, the sound era technically began with The Jazz Singer, a 1927 silent movie with some audio parts to it. Most of the movie silent, but Jolson's singing was heard by audiences and took the movie industry by storm. And it's somehow poetically fitting that the first big blockbuster in American cinema and the first big film with sound are both so intimately associated with racist imagery. Now, once the sound era really got rolling into the 1930s, you still had white actors playing other races. That didn't go away. Yellowface especially was popular, and you even had actors like Louise Reiner win Oscars for playing Chinese characters. But the real racism was reserved for African Americans in American movies. In the 1930s, they became the butt of jokes in almost any movie they appeared in. It wasn't just that they were made to play nothing but porters and servants and maids. It's that they were made to speak in a very degrading, stereotypical way and act in a way that was completely undignified. All so the audience could laugh at them. Actors like Lincoln Perry, better known as Stepin Fetchit with his stage name, became huge crowd pleasers. Other actors like Montan Moreland and Willie Best followed suit and did much of the same thing. It was really the only way a black actor could get work in Hollywood in the 1930s. And, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, you had actors like Hattie McDaniel. She got to play stronger characters. Even though she was almost always playing a maid or servant of some kind, she still got to infuse a bit more of a stronger central character to those roles than most other black actors were allowed to do. But remember earlier when I said the 1930s was the best decade in movies for really showing who we were in America at the time? Well, that's because there were things that happened in movies that weren't overtly aimed at degrading or intimidating or ridiculing black people. They were just things that existed that let you know where everyone stood at the time. Take the movie Hell's House. This was a movie done in 1932. It's an early Bette Davis, Pat O'Brien film. Now, neither of them were A-list stars yet, so this was more of a B-list movie. But something happens in it that I think calls out the racism of movies in the 1930s better than the stereotypes and the blackface and everything else like that. It calls it out better because it's so absolutely innocuous in its presentation. The scene involves actor Junior Durkin, who plays a young man trying to find his aunt and uncle. He has an address for an apartment building, but that's it. He doesn't have the actual apartment number. So when he goes inside, he has to decide which door to knock on. And he plays a game of eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Here's the scene.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch ya.
And we'll stop it right there because he doesn't say tiger. Now, that's important. This was 1932. That means that after the script was written, it was approved. On the set, they filmed the scene. And it was then edited, studio executives approved it, and it was released. That means that no one from the very start of the process to the very end of the process, raised their hand and said, maybe he should say tiger instead. The reason no one said that is because no one thought to say it. It seemed perfectly normal to have him use that word in that eeny, meeny, miny, mo rhyme. Everyone involved, not one of them thought to themselves, that could be offensive. That's how it made it into the film. And the film was released that way. And you can still find it in the movie today. And that's important as well. I also said earlier that I don't think any of it should ever be censored or taken away. Because one thing that the movies of the 1930s do is, again, show us what was going on at the time and show us who we were as a people. And it's very important to make sure everyone can actually see that. It may be offensive, but it's important to leave it there for all to see. But even when Hollywood was trying its best to be racially sensitive, it would once again show itself to be completely racially insensitive. Take Imitation of Life, directed by John Stahl and released in 1934. In the movie, a white woman played by Claudette Colbert befriends a black woman played by Louise Beavers. Each of them has a daughter, and Louise Beavers' daughter, played as an adult by Freddie Washington, is very light-skinned. She basically passes for white and does so, the character does so, in the movie. In that movie, which is supposedly about examining racial discrepancies and divides within America, still, within the movie itself, has so many divides, it's beyond ironic. For instance, the character played by Louise Beavers comes up with a pancake recipe that the character Claudette Colbert plays loves. Claudette Colbert then markets that pancake recipe and turns it into a successful corporation. Only after she has done that, only after she has basically taken the black woman's recipe, used the black woman's likeness, used the black woman's name, and made a fortune off the recipe, only then does she decide to allow the black woman to have 20% of the company. The company that only exists because of her pancake recipe. There's even a famous scene, probably more infamous than famous at this point, of the two women in the mansion that Claudette Colbert now owns because she's become rich from this pancake recipe. And Louise Beavers still lives with her, even though she's not really her maid, she kind of is. And it shows Claudette Colbert and Louise Beavers going to bed. And Claudette Colbert goes upstairs, and Louise Beavers goes downstairs. Now, one of the interesting things about this movie, far more interesting, I think, than the remake in 1959, is that they actually had a black actress play the character of the daughter who passes for white. That actress was Freddie Washington, who does an extraordinary job in the movie, and yet wasn't nominated. In 1959, a white actress, Susan Kohner, played the role and was nominated. And all of this takes us right up to the end of the decade, in which, like Birth of a Nation, the biggest box office winner was all about the Civil War. In 1936, Margaret Mitchell published Gone with the Wind. It became an instant bestseller, topping the bestseller list 2 years in a row and winning the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. This immediately got the attention of Hollywood, and David O. Selznick acquired the rights and made a massive, huge, epic motion picture in 1939. Directed by practically everybody in Hollywood, but Victor Fleming's name is the one that ended up in the title credits, and starring, of course, Vivien Leigh and Clark Gable. The movie Gone with the Wind was a huge hit. In fact, it remains to this day one of the most popular films ever released in the United States. Ever. Its ticket sales still place it in the top 10 easily. And all that success got A lot of very bad history in front of a lot of people. Gone with the Wind was just as bad as Birth of a Nation, but they had learned a lot of important lessons from it. 1. Don't have white actors play the slaves in blackface. And 2. Don't mention those guys in the pointy white hoods. Don't show them and don't say their name, which they didn't. In fact, when they do have a rally in the movie, it's simply called,
"I've got to go to a political meeting."
A political meeting. Gone with the Wind was just as bad, as I say, as Birth of a Nation, but not in the same blatant, blunt way that Birth of a Nation was, which is what makes Gone with the Wind, to my mind, so much worse. It presented the same ideas, but in a very cleaned up, whitewashed way. Both the book and the movie are highly influenced by the Dunning School. That's the school of thought named for the Professor William Archibald Dunning of Columbia University, who basically started the white supremacist notion that, well, the South was fighting the good fight, it was all a beautiful lost cause, and Reconstruction and civil rights and suffrage for freed black men was just a bad idea all around. Gone with the Wind, the movie, goes out of its way to support this thesis. You will not find a supporter of the Union, a Union soldier, or anyone involved in Reconstruction in this movie that is good in any way. The very few times we even see someone from the North, they are portrayed in an entirely bad light. Union soldiers, sure, you'll see them. You'll see them raiding Tara or trying to attack Vivian Lee's Scarlett O'Hara. I mean, what else are they going to do, right? They're awful Union people. Carpetbaggers coming in from the North to, support suffrage for freed black slaves and help them gain civil rights. Whew, just awful people. And if you are to see anyone in the movie who is a black actor, they're either playing someone subservient and loyal to the white power structure of the South, or they're cocky and smug and uppity with those carpetbaggers. Like this guy. The movie also goes out of its way to tell us that involuntary servitude is bad if it's prison labor. If it's slave labor, that's okay because, well, I mean, those people were like family. Why, look, Ashley explains it right here. Right here.
Scarlett, I will not make money out of the enforced labor and misery of others.
You weren't so particular about owning slaves.
That was different. We didn't treat them that way. Besides, I'd have freed them all when Father died, if the war hadn't already freed them.
See? God, he was going to free him anyway. I mean, the war got in the way of... he was going to free them anyway, though. Gone with the Wind is pretty gross and disgusting as a movie. And, of course, it's one of the most popular films ever made. And it won a slew of Oscars. Probably the only historically important Oscar, to its credit, is the one that went to Hattie McDaniel, who was the first black actor to ever receive an Academy Award. She won Best Supporting Actress for her role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind. And so the most racially tinged decade in American movie-making history came to an end with the absolute highlight, or lowlight, of Gone with the Wind. In fact, it premiered in December of 1939. So it literally closes out the decade at just exactly where you would expect that decade to close. World War II, of course, got in the way of Hollywood movie making over the next 5 years as they supported the war effort, and as the horrors of the Holocaust became apparent to the rest of the world, and we discovered that the mustachioed man from Germany had even taken influence and admiration of the Jim Crow laws in the South, the treatment of African Americans in the United States, and the treatment of black actors on film started to become a little bit more of an embarrassment to everyone. And the overtly racist attitudes portrayed in movies in the 1930s, thankfully, started to wane. That's not to say they went away entirely. Racism continued in the movies for decades and continues to varying degrees to this very day. But the most horrid racism that was that of the 1930s did finally start to ebb. Succeeding as a black actor in Hollywood in the 1930s was not a matter of talent. It didn't matter how good you were. The odds were stacked against you, and the system was built against you. Let me point out 2 examples. 1. Remember that poster I showed earlier on the screen when I was talking about imitation of life? Look at it again. The 4 most important characters in that movie are the white mother and white daughter, played by Claudette Colbert and Rochelle Hudson, and the black mother and the black daughter, played by Louise Beavers and Freddie Washington. Only 2 of those 4 names are on that poster. Even when you go down to the smaller print, there's Ned Sparks, there's Warren William, and of course there's Henry Armetta. There isn't Louise Beavers or Freddie Washington. 2 of the central performers in the movie are not on the theatrical release poster. Even in promoting the film, they didn't want to use the black actors. So even when you were doing a movie like Imitation of Life, if you were a black actor, the cards were still stacked against you. But the other example is far more extreme and far more telling. That example is the actor Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was an everyman, a Renaissance man. Paul Robeson was a theatrically trained Shakespearean actor. Paul Robeson was a lawyer. Paul Robeson was a writer. He was an athlete. He was a film actor. He was an opera singer. Paul Robeson had it all. What he didn't have was the desire to play subservient roles in American movies. And so his American movie career never really took off. He had some decent roles in American films, but it's more than telling that his best roles came overseas, especially in England, where he did musicals like Big Fella and the great movie Song of Freedom. Watch this scene with him and actress Elizabeth Welch, another African-American actress who had much greater success in England.
Met a fella in the pub coming home. Sailing for Africa tonight. We'll be casting off about now. In a week or 2, he'll be on the coast.
Africa. It's always Africa, isn't it, John?
After all, that's my home. That's where we come from. I wonder which part. I'm always wondering. Perhaps there. Or there. What wouldn't I give to know?
But you're happy here. The people are kind.
Oh, I know. Oh, they're grand people, Bert and Nell and the fellas down at the docks. But somewhere in those parts are our people, Ruth. And I've got a feeling they're grand people, too. The people we belong to. I even know the direction it lies. This window points right south. If we could see hundreds and hundreds of miles. It's funny. That fella didn't want to go. It's natural. He's leaving his people to go out amongst strangers. He'll be sort of out of place. Lonely, maybe. But however hard I try, I always feel the same here. Out of place. Wouldn't it be grand if one of these days we could... Why, honey, what's the matter?
You'll never be satisfied here, John. Whatever I do to make this home, it'll never be really home to you, will it?
That's the kind of scene that simply couldn't exist in an American film in the 1930s. It had to be done in England or France or some other country, just not America. And those were the kind of scenes that Paul Robeson wanted to play, but he couldn't play them here. Not in the States, not in Hollywood. So even if you had the talent, it was no guarantee you were going to succeed. If you weren't white, the system wasn't made for you. And it's important that we never forget this about Hollywood history, because of all the great art that Hollywood produced from the earliest parts of the century up through the end of it, they also portrayed a lot of hideous, racist stereotypes. And it's important that we don't forget any of that, or lose sight of any of it. And I will go back to Gone with the Wind for 1 second here to say that it is currently, as of this video recording, featured on Max. And I will say, as someone who has worked as a film historian for Turner Classic Movies, that I am happy to say that it was Turner Classic Movies that made the decision to do this, which is basically put up this disclaimer. The disclaimer is basically saying, yeah, the movie's racist. Yeah, it was wrong then and it's wrong now. But no, we're not going to edit any of this out. We're not going to censor it. We're not going to take any of it away. We're going to show it as it is, which is the way it should be done. One of my biggest gripes with movie studios, studios like Disney, is that they have taken racist content from what they produced in the 1930s and 40s and 50s and tried to sweep it under the rug as if it never happened. Look, it did happen. We all know it happened. In 1940, right at the tail end of the 1930s, Walt Disney produced Fantasia. And in Fantasia, there is a horrible racial stereotype in a fantasy sequence. It was removed, and you will never find it again on a re-release of Fantasia. But it's important to know it was there, because that's who we were at the time. I still stand by the 1930s as the greatest decade in American, possibly world, movie-making history. It simply saw technological, aesthetic, and artistic changes like no other decade has produced. It also showed the world just what America's mindset was on race, and should never be forgotten. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. If you did like this, please give a like and subscribe. It certainly helps out. And as always, drive safely.